Yes. Well, it is my distinct pleasure to give this year's Innovator Award, Retina Innovator Award, to Cedric Francois. Cedric. Cedric, I cannot think of anybody more deserving of this. And I want everybody here to know how you got from a really cute kid in Belgium to this person who created this great company. So if I could have my slides, please, and sit down because we're going to chat. And happy birthday, Cedric. Happy birthday. We know he looks younger, but that's his birthday, so we all know his age now. Okay, so next slide, please. So here you are, Cedric. Here you are, you're in Belgium. You're a really cute kid. You went to med school, and you became a great scientist, too, besides a hand surgeon. I know that something must have happened to a hand for you to, turn your back against surgery, me appreciating surgery so much. But tell us, are there scientists in your family?
Well, my dad's a surgeon, so that's, of course, where it all started. And I was going to do physics initially, but then one day when I was 17, 18, I was ready to, I had done all the exams. I was actually going to come to the States to study physics, and I broke my scaphoid. And one day I was in the hospital for a follow-up, and there was a person that came by and looked at me and said, like, your dad saved my life. And that for me was kind of the moment. And in the car home, I told my mom that I was not going to go to the States. I was going to study medicine in Belgium. And she was very nice about it. I got home and she went to the kitchen, and I went upstairs and I took a bath. And I lived in Belgium, so in Belgium we have a bath with a bidet next to it. And there's a point to this. My dad comes home and I hear him go to the kitchen, talk to my mom, and he runs upstairs and comes into the bathroom, me flush naked, sits on the bidet and says, have you totally lost your mind? And I'm like, and he's like, haven't you seen how much I had to work and I never got to spend time with you and how hard this was? And what are you thinking? And so I told my dad on the bidet why I love to do medicine. I didn't tell him the story from the hospital. And then he stopped and he looked at me and said, if that's what you believe, then it's the most beautiful profession in the world. And that was...
Yes, that is lovely. Could I have my next slide, please? So here's Cedric, okay? Here's Cedric, doing what all kids in Belgium do, which is eating a waffle with Nutella, right? And that's his picture at graduation. And then, he was thinking of going to the States, but he got lost in this world map and ended up not, the furthest place that was not Antarctica, which is Córdoba, Argentina. So exactly, Cedric, how did you end up there, and how did Córdoba change the course of your life?
Yeah, so this is actually one of my favorite stories because I tell it often at our company. When we think about serendipity, all the little things that we do in life ultimately impact what we end up doing. And when I was in medical school, 20 people in our year were allowed to go to South America for an internship. And two of my best friends and I, we wanted to go together. So there was like a lottery one night where they were going to determine out of 8 spots where each of these little groups could go. And my whole life I've been incredibly lucky, except last month. Sorry. And my friends at the time are like, Cedric, you need to go, and we want to go to Quito. And if it's not Quito, we want to go to Santiago de Chile. I'm like, all right, I've got this. I went, and I had a bucket with 8 numbers, and I drew the lowest number. So here I was, the last one, being able to choose where we went, and we took the leftovers, which was Argentina. That's nothing against Argentina, it's because the people the year before didn't have a good experience, whatever it was. So I went back and I said, look, let's go. And that's what it ended up being. But I always think about that, because had I drawn any other number that day, 7, 5, 2, 1, I probably wouldn't know any of you. Apellis probably would not exist, right? And it's a very tangible example, but I think a great one for how things happen. So that's how I ended up in Argentina. I loved it there, and I stayed to work for a while.
Okay. Okay, so going back to my slide with the world map. So here you are in Cordoba. You know, you did not like the gaucho experience, and then you decided to become a doctor in a cruise ship. You said, okay, I've had it with the rain in Belgium. I really had it with the horses in Cordoba, and I want to go through the Caribbean and the Mediterranean and be a doctor in a cruise ship, right?
It wasn't that simple. I mean, when I went to Argentina to do my residency, they don't pay your residency in Argentina. It's considered part of your education. And I didn't feel like I could go to my dad and say, like, you know, support me for another 5 years. And in Belgium, I used to play music in medical school, and that's how I paid for my studies. So in Argentina, I'm like, you know, I'll just go make music when I'm not on call. And I remember going to these bars and saying, like, hey, you know, what are you going to pay me to play here this weekend? And the best answer I got was, how much are you going to pay us to play here this weekend? And then I realized that the funds that I had were going to run out pretty quickly. And at that time, I was already kind of very interested in research, and I heard about a hand transplantation program in Louisville. And one day I got a child that came into my office that was phocomelic, so was born without a forearm. And this kid had a myoelectric prosthesis and was moving around, and I was like fascinated by this kid, you know, he's like so handy. And then his mom asked him to take something out of his pocket, and he had to try like 5 or 6 times. And then you realize something that we never think about, which is when you don't have sensation, you know, all you have is visual feedback. And I'm fascinated by this thing. I'm walking home, and I think back of my medical school, I mean, you all know this, right? I mean, pain, temperature, proprioception, point discrimination, and pressure. And then I got home, I had a laptop, and on the laptop I'm like, there's point discrimination, there's pressure. So I went to the bioengineering department in Cordoba, which is a big name for a guy in a room full of wires. And we made basically like 2 patches on the thumb and the index, wired it to the back of this kid with an area that was about 10 times larger, and then when something would move over the prosthesis, there was like a paresthetic feeling that the child would feel on his back. This was just an N of 1, but after a month I went to visit this kid who I had asked to practice for 10 minutes a day. And I said, I mean, you know, how's it going? And the mom says, oh, he doesn't take it off. And I spoke to this kid and I said, like, ¿qué está pasando, Manuel? And he said, like, doctor, es que se siente como si fuese mi mano. It feels like it's my hand. And God knows if that was real or placebo or any of the above, but for me that was a miracle. And I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. Then I wrote to Louisville and I said, like, look, I would love to join this hand transplantation program. And they said, okay, you can come in 8 months. And I was completely out of cash. And then one weekend I said, okay, what am I going to do to fill up the treasury a little bit? And I wrote like 100 letters in one weekend to 5 projects that I always had dreamt of doing. Like not so exotic, but working on a drilling platform, going to South Africa to work in a dispensary, go to Antarctica, go to National Geographic, and then work on a cruise ship. And a week later, I got a call from the medical director at Carnival Cruise Lines, and he starts talking to me in Spanish, then in French, and I'm like, what's going on? He said, like, yeah, I read your resume. Would you like to work on a cruise ship? And I'm like, that depends. And he says, like...
do I have to pay to be on the cruise?
Yeah, well, that didn't cross my mind. And he says, like, when do I need to start? He says, like, next week. So anyway, long story short, I kind of got all my stuff together. And I remember this as being one of the scariest moments in my life. I ended up in Miami, where I had never been, loved the palm trees, went to the headquarters, and had a one-way ticket. So I had never seen a cruise ship in my life. And I sit in this office, and he explains to me that I'm going to be on this cruise ship with 3,500 people, 3 nurses. And I look at him and I'm like, who's the other doctor? And he looks at me, he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, my supervisor? No. He's like, no, you're the doctor. And I literally started sweating in my suit. I'm like, God, what's going on? But, I mean, I had done all of these things, so I was just a little afraid to do it by myself. So then I flew to Tampa, and I saw this cruise ship for the first time, which was gigantic. And I went to the infirmary, and there's a nurse sitting there. She looks at me. She's like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Hi, I'm the new doctor." And she cracks up because she thought there's no way that this child is going to be the doctor on this cruise ship. But it was amazing. One of the greatest experiences of my life because, it was really being a physician, a psychologist to the crew primarily, and to the other people as well. So,
Okay, next slide. Okay, so here you are, right? You're doing hand surgery, and then you decide to do a PhD in physiology, right? You had done the first successful hand transplant. You were part of that team. So how did, and pretty much at that time, you launched Potentia Pharmaceuticals. So how did that come to be?
yeah, so that's it's not long stories here, but short version is Alec McKeels, one of my best friends at the time, was attending HBS. And they had started a company, Potentia Pharmaceuticals, to participate in this business plan competition. And I love business plans, because they don't really take into account if something exists or not. It's all about the opportunity, etc. So you could write a great business plan about interplanetary travel to Pluto, Great market, people want to do it. There's just a small problem, right? This business plan had the same issue. So they won the business plan competition, but what was behind it was completely undoable. And for 2 years, we spoke about this, and it was fun and everything. But after 2 years with these friends, I'm like, look, we can talk about this or actually do it. And 2 of these scientists, Pascal de Châtelet, who's still with us, and Paul Olson, who unfortunately passed away, said, okay, we're going to try to do this. And we decided that we were going to raise $300,000. And if we could do that, then they would move from Boston, from Harvard, and come over to Louisville, Kentucky. And so I went around and I did my pitches, and I got soft commitments for $300,000. And I didn't know at the time that a soft commitment is worth as much as a promise in a bar at the end of a long night. So obviously I called my friends. I'm like, we got it. Come over. So now they're in Louisville, Kentucky, and I call these people back. There's no money. And I was very, very scared at the time this thing is going to fail, and my friends, what am I going to do? And then I went pitching in New York, doing, what I had been taught to do. This was not going well. And then one day I learned something that I remembered for the rest of my life. I went in to pitch with this individual that we walk into a room and we connected. We were I like this guy. And I tell him the whole story for 1 hour, the pitch according to the rules. And at the end of the hour, he says, yeah, not for me, and sends me out. And I went back to the hotel, and I couldn't sleep all night. And in the morning, I said, I need to see this guy again. And I bought a bottle of wine, gave it to his assistant, and I waited in the corridor. And he walked by, he says, what's going on? He said, yeah. I'm like, can I talk to you? He said, okay, 5 minutes, what is it? And I said, look, everything you told me yesterday is true. We don't have anything. But the 2 people that I'm working with are the greatest people I ever met, and I'm going to do all I can to make this happen. And he looks at me, and he's like an intercom. He goes like, Sheila, write me a check for $100,000, please. And I'm like, really? That's how it's done? And he comes back. He's like, what's your name, young man? And he said something at the time that again really carried everything that we did afterwards, which was, he said, you don't think you're going to be back here next year, but I know you will. And I don't want to not have heard from you. He said, what I want is every month for you to send me a progress report and tell me how much money you spend, what your budget was, the key events, and your pitfalls and solutions. And for about 12 to 13 years, every month, I would make this progress report. And all these angel investors that were there in the beginning became great friends and were there to protect us. And when we had to get venture capital, we always had leverage. It was like this amazing communicative platform where the dream that we had ultimately became everybody's dream.
And how did you focus on the eye? How did you come into that?
Yeah, so another serendipitous moment, right? So we were very interested in changing macrophage behavior. So it was really great to see Tarek's presentation earlier, because that's really where we came from. How do you change macrophage behavior in geographic atrophy? And in 2004, we saw at the time what was happening with iTech and with Macugen, and very kind of impressed by kind of the world of business that was associated with the eye. And we had to raise money, so that wasn't intricately going to be a part of our destiny. And we looked at this disease and we were like, macrophages, we believe, are very important here. And we came up with a way of changing macrophage behavior that involved, bear with me for a second, taking the head group of phosphatidylserine, this negatively charged phospholipids, and attaching it to antibodies that would bind to the type 2 receptor in an effort to do anti-angiogenesis. And one day somebody told us, what's the cost of goods of this thing? And we're like, what is cost of goods? And then we calculated it. We're like, well, like $2 million per year per patient. So that didn't work. But at the time, we were like interested in this whole thing. And one day, Pascal and I, we walked through a corridor and we see a poster on complement. And we look at each other and we're like, inhibiting complement would be a great way to change macrophage behavior. And we went to the computer and we literally Googled complement inhibitors. And that's how it all started. And then a year later, I went to the Macula Society, and that was another kind of seminal moment for us, which at the time was in 2005 in Key Biscayne. And I remember the first night getting into the reception, and there's like a big lawn. For all those of you that have been there, all the retina docs are talking. I don't know anybody. It's like being a junior in high school. You know, you come in, hi, I'm Cedric, nice to meet you. Nobody wanted to talk to me. But I met a few amazing people, which were the starts of great friendships. Many of you are still here. Many of them are part of this amazing world that we live in. But this was an uphill battle. I was very young at the time. As a matter of fact, Caroline at the time saw me, and I spoke to her for the first time. And she was already back then a very well-established presence in this world. And she takes my business card, and I had not put MD, PhD behind my name. And she looks at me, she's like, "You're a doctor? Put it on your card." And she gives it back to me and sends me home. From then on, I did. But the last night, I'm sitting at the gala dinner next to Michael Klein, between him and his wife. And María and I are talking, and she looks at Michael. She's like, "Michael, talk to this young man." And I start talking to him. And he asks me, "What are you doing?" So I tell him the story about the science behind what we are trying to do. And he literally goes white. And he says, "How do you know this?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, in a couple of months, I can't tell you why, but you will know. You're going to give me a call, and I would love to join your scientific advisory board." And he was one of the reviewers on one of the 3 seminal papers on the association between CFH402 and macular degeneration that came out at the time. And then a couple of months later, that paper came out. I remembered Michael. I called him, and it was kind of the genesis, really, of Potentia and our ability to break out of, just research and being in Louisville.
Okay, next slide, please. So I see that, your co-founders all had something in common. They spoke French and one Spanish, so it's all the Romance languages. There's a bias against other languages. But tell us, what were your biggest challenges and how did you overcome them outside of this past month?
Well, we've had a lot, huh? Last month is the last one in a long list of big challenges, and I don't want to keep you all away from drinks and dinner. But without kind of giving one specific example, Pascal, who's one of the greatest people I know and one of the smartest people I know as well, he always says things are never as good as they look, and things are never as bad as they look. And to be honest, that has carried us through everything that we went through in the last so many years. I mean, the most recent ones, I'll give you 2 examples before what we're encountering now, of course. The first one was at the start of our phase 3 clinical trial in Derby and Oaks. Some of you may remember that we treated 6 individuals, and all 6 developed severe intraocular inflammation. So at the time, we were like, wow, what the hell happened? Immediately, we stopped the trial enrollment. And then we looked at our phase 2 clinical trial, at the Philly trial, and we realized we had I think it was about 1,500 injections at the time, without seeing any of this happen, right? And so we're like, what changed between phase 2 and phase 3? And so we realized something entered into the manufacturing process that we can take out. And I remember going to the board at the time, and I said, look, this is terrible, but there are 3 good pieces of news here. I said, number one, this happened at the beginning of the study, not in the middle, because then it would be over. And I mean, a phase 3 clinical program in geographic atrophy quickly costs $500 million, right? I said, number two, this is happening in all patients, not in 1 out of 10, because then it's incredibly hard to figure out what is going on, right? And number three, I said, this is something that we can figure out because we have a reference, which is our phase 2 clinical trial. And I remember at the board meeting, I said, compare it to a rocket. It went up, the engines fell out, it came down, it wobbled a bit, but it's still standing. And then it was one of the most magical things. I mean, within 4.5 months, where the retina doctors were amazing. I mean, they showed such dedication to help us figure this out. We did 7 toxicology studies, 2 small phase 1 studies in patients, and we figured it out. And this happened in September of 2018, and by March 2019, that study had restarted. So then, of course, Derby and Oaks, right? I mean, when a phase 3 clinical trial misses its primary endpoint, it's disastrous, right? I mean, your company collapses, you're afraid that everybody's going to run. But our chief statistician at the time came into my room and he said, look, Cedric, we won the inverse lottery. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, we had really bad patients, rapidly progressing patients in our active arm. And I'm like, how do you know that? He said, well, 2 things. First of all, after 2 months into the study, the active arm was already 20% faster than the sham control, right? Now, unless the drug was making it progress faster, that was an imbalance. And number 2, he said, look at the fellow eye analysis. And in all of our studies, the fellow eye analysis is always what set us free, There's a homogeneity that you find in this fellow eye analysis that's extraordinary. And Derby was just like Oaks at the time. And when we had our town hall, right after Derby, Tim and I, we had a glass of tequila because, that's a hard message to give to the company. But we were confident. We knew that we had science on our side. And all the noise, of your stock pricing crumbles and went away. And we're like, we can get this right. It missed the primary endpoint because the active arm had to catch up with the sham before it could start showing its efficacy. And look at what we have at 24 months, right? These 2 trials are virtually identical. So, yeah, those are 2 examples. Sorry, I'm going way too long.
So
I never get an award. I'm taking advantage.
You have been an inspiration for so many people and a great mentor. So how are you going to continue innovating and inspiring people to innovate moving forward?
Well, I think, first of all, something that I feel every day when I wake up is an immense amount of gratitude because, this is not normal, right? I mean, so many things go wrong, can go wrong all the time, like last month. But at Apellis, I try to inspire a culture of gratitude and caring and doing what is right first, always. And then somehow magically things always fall into place when you do that. Sometimes I'm asked to teach in business school, and I think there are kind of 3 phases when you start a company. The first phase is very chaotic. You can flip your idea on one day, do something else the next day. It doesn't matter, and you're not spending a lot of money, so it's really fun. But even that's stressful for people. The second phase, I think, is really, really hard. Because now you actually start spending money that you don't really have yet. You have decided what you're going to do, and you have to find people that are going to believe in you. And most often, you have a big brick wall that you're running into, and just at the last second something happens, and now the thing is born. And then the third phase, you can't really mess around anymore. You have investors, you have a plan, you can't shift anymore, and that's where execution becomes key. I think it's very difficult to make that transition through these 3 phases and kind of adjust to that. And I think carrying those values is, I think, what makes that possible, because that is the common denominator. It's to love what you do, to care for people, to be kind and to be grateful. And that is what I think made our company and this drug product what it is today.
Yes. Lovely. And next slide, please. I know that all of you think
God.
of Cedric as
Where'd you get that?
as this lab rat, you know, a really boring, nerdy, you know, lab person. But actually, there's many other sides to Cedric. He, for some reason, is a minister. I don't know where that came from. He's, of course, a rocker, and he can dress up. So, so next slide, please.
Thank you. Let's
So
move on.
congratulations on an incredible journey, Cedric. It's been fantastic, and this is more than dessert, and your story is lovely. So
Thank you so much.
keep up the good work. We're waiting to see so much more to come from you.
Well, thank you so much. But